There are secrets, and then there are the structures we build to house them. Some people have a little lockbox in the back of their mind. Others, well, they build an entire second life, a complete parallel existence running right alongside the one everyone sees. And the thing about those structures is that they require constant maintenance. They're built on a foundation of lies, and every day you have to get up and be the architect, the engineer, and the construction crew, patching the cracks, shoring up the walls, making sure the whole damn thing doesn't come crashing down. I've seen it 100 times. The sheer exhaustion on a person's face when they finally walk onto my stage. It's not just the weight of the secret, it's the weight of the work it takes to keep it. When I first read the file on Mark, that's what I saw. Not in his photo. In his photo, he was the guy next door. The kind of man you'd trust to watch your kids, to coach Little League. He was a high school history teacher, married for 15 years to Sarah, a pediatric nurse. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, a modest home in a quiet suburb, and a minivan in the driveway. On paper, they were the American dream. But paper doesn't tell you about the look in a person's eyes. Sarah had contacted us, and her letter was a cry for help, lost in a fog of confusion. She wrote about money disappearing from their joint account, small amounts at first, then larger chunks. She wrote about Mark's mood swings, the nights he'd be distant and agitated, staring at his phone with an intensity she hadn't seen directed at her in years. She talked about a change in his spirit, a hollowness that had crept in. She used words like secretive, deceptive, and I don't even know who he is anymore. Those are the phrases that get my attention because they're not just describing a problem, they're describing the erosion of a reality. The life Sarah thought she had was being systematically dismantled, and she didn't even know who was holding the sledgehammer. Mark's story, as he told it to her, was a mess of bad investments. A loan to a friend that went sour, a series of plausible but ultimately flimsy excuses that just barely held together. But my producers and I, we know how to pull on a thread, and the thread we pulled led us somewhere far darker than a bad stock tip. It led us to a world of online casinos, high-stakes poker apps, and a level of debt that was frankly breathtaking. Mark wasn't just a man with a secret, he was the mayor of a whole secret city, and the economy was collapsing. When I met them backstage before the show, the dynamic was palpable. Sarah was a bundle of raw, anxious energy, her hands twisting a tissue into a shredded mess. She was looking for an ally, someone to help her find the husband she'd lost. Mark, on the other hand, was a fortress of calm, a little too calm. It was a practiced, defensive calm. He shook my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Dr. Phil, I'm here to save my marriage. I know I've made some mistakes with our finances, but I'm an open book." Now that right there is a tell. When someone walks in and announces they're an open book, you can bet your last dollar there's a chapter or 2 they've ripped out. His body language was screaming at me. He sat with his arms crossed, a subconscious barrier. He'd nod along with Sarah as she spoke, a pantomime of agreement, but his jaw was clenched tight. He was performing the role of the contrite husband, but the performance was all on the surface. Underneath, I could sense a frantic, panicked energy. He wasn't there to save his marriage. Not really. He was there for damage control. He had a narrative in his head, a carefully constructed version of the story where he was a well-intentioned guy who just got in a little over his head. He was prepared to confess to a misdemeanor, hoping we wouldn't discover the felony. The central problem, as I saw it, wasn't just the gambling. That was a symptom. The problem was the double life. It was the fact that Mark had created an entire identity, a secret self who was powerful, who took risks, who lived on the edge, and that secret self was now threatening to burn his real life to the ground. He was living a cognitive dissonance so profound that I wasn't sure he even knew which version of Mark was the real one anymore. The moment the lights hit them on stage, the dynamic shifted again. The audience disappears for people in that situation. It's just the two of them and me sitting in those chairs under a microscope. Sarah began to talk, and the carefully constructed dam of her composure just crumbled. It wasn't a flood of histrionics. It was a slow, painful leak of hurt. She spoke about finding credit card statements hidden in the trunk of his car, about tracking their bank account and seeing withdrawals from ATMs in towns he had no reason to be in. She talked about the emotional whiplash. One day he'd be affectionate and present. The next he was a ghost in their own house, his mind a million miles away. What I was hearing wasn't just a story about money. It was a story about betrayal by 1,000 tiny cuts. Every lie, every secret withdrawal was another snip at the fabric of their trust. I turned to Mark. His face was a mask of placid concern. He was nodding, listening, doing all the things a husband is supposed to do when his wife is in pain. But it was a performance. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was calculating, anticipating my next move, preparing his defense. So I didn't go where he expected. I didn't start with the money. Mark, I said, leaning forward. Tell me about your job. You're a history teacher. Do you enjoy it? The question caught him off guard. He blinked. Yes, I do. I love history. I love teaching the kids. What period of history fascinates you the most? He hesitated, then a flicker of genuine enthusiasm broke through the mask. The Gilded Age, the Industrial Revolution, the men who built this country, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the sheer scale of the risks they took, the empires they built from nothing. It's epic. And right there, that was the key. I could see the whole story laid out in front of me. Here is a man who spends his days teaching teenagers about titans of industry, men who gambled everything on a single idea and won the world. He lectures about epic risks and monumental rewards. And then he goes home, grades papers on the reconstruction, helps with homework, and takes out the recycling. The dissonance between the world he taught and the world he lived in must have been deafening. His life, a good life by any objective measure, probably felt crushingly small, predictable, and devoid of that epic quality he admired. It must feel very contained. I said, choosing the word carefully. Your life, it's safe, it's predictable, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you have a pension plan. There's not a lot of risk in that, is there? He shifted in his chair. No, I guess not. So where do you go to feel that rush? I asked him point blank, where do you go to feel like Carnegie for a night? He knew exactly what I was talking about. His practice calm faltered. The fortress had been breached. He started with the old story, the one he'd rehearsed. I made some investments online. I was trying to get ahead, to give my family a better life. Don't do that, Mark, I said, keeping my voice level. Don't insult my intelligence, and more importantly, don't insult hers. You weren't investing in the stock market. You weren't building an empire. You were sitting in your car in a parking lot 2 towns over watching a digital roulette wheel spin, weren't you? You were playing online poker until 3 in the morning after your wife and kids were asleep. That's not investing, that's an escape. That's a secret. The color drained from his face. Sarah let out a small, choked sob. It was the first time, I suspect, that the behavior had been given its true name in front of them both. The word investing was his shield. It allowed him to frame his addiction as a misguided attempt at providing for his family. It was noble in a way, but gambling, that word is dirty. It carries the stench of desperation and deceit. The backstory here wasn't about a single event. It was about a slow burn. It probably started 5 or 6 years ago, a small bet on a football game through an app. He won. He felt that jolt, that dopamine hit of being right, of beating the odds. It was a tiny taste of that epic feeling. So he did it again. The wins made him feel powerful. The losses created a burning need to chase the money to prove he could win it back. And with every bet, the secret got bigger. The lie had to expand to contain it. He wasn't just lying about the money, he was lying about who he was. He had to create a character, a secret version of Mark who was a savvy, high-stakes player, a man in control. But the truth is, that character was controlling him. An addiction doesn't just take your money, it hijacks your identity. It rewires your brain until the thing you think you want is the very thing that's destroying you. He wasn't trying to build an empire for his family. He was trying to build a fantasy world for himself, a place where he wasn't just a history teacher in a quiet suburb. His whole body stiffened. It was the reaction of a man who'd been hit, but he wasn't going to show you he was hurt. He was going to hit back. And in these situations, the first punch is almost always verbal, and it's almost always aimed at the person closest to them. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping, taking on a hard, defensive edge. He turned to Sarah, and for the first time, the mask of the concerned husband was gone, replaced by a flash of raw resentment. "You have no idea the pressure I'm under to provide, to keep up with the neighbors, the private lessons for the kids, the car payments. It's always something. You're always worried about money." I was trying to solve the problem. I was trying to give you the life you wanted. I watched Sarah just deflate. It was like he'd reached over and unplugged her from her life source. Because that right there is the classic move of a manipulator. It's called blame shifting. He takes his secret, his addiction, his deceit, and he repackages it as a gift for her. A twisted, poisoned gift. He's not the villain, he's a martyr, crushed under the weight of her expectations. And the most insidious part is that it contains a kernel of truth. Was she worried about money? Of course she was, because he was draining their bank accounts. He was creating the very problem he now claimed he was trying to solve. "Hold on a minute, Mark," I said, cutting in before he could build any more momentum. "Let's stop right there. Are you telling me that Sarah asked you to secretly drain your savings, lie about your whereabouts, and hide credit card statements in the trunk of your car? Did she put that on the grocery list next to milk and bread?" He glared at me. "No, of course not. You're twisting my words." "No, I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm untwisting them. You're the one who's got them all tangled up. You're talking about pressure. Let's be real clear about that. Life has pressure. Being a husband and a father has pressure. But that pressure doesn't write the prescription for the poison you choose. You chose to deal with that pressure by escaping into a fantasy world where you could be a high roller. You didn't do this for her. You did this for you. You did this for the rush, for the hit. And it's time you owned that." The air on the stage was thick with tension. This is the point in the process where things can go one of two ways. The person can crack open, or they can double bolt the door. Mark was building a barricade. He was retreating back into his narrative. "I made some bad choices," he conceded, his voice tight. "I got in over my head, but it was never meant to hurt anyone. I had a system. I was close to winning it all back." "A system?" I repeated. "There is no system. The only system that works is the one the house uses to take your money. You're a history teacher. You admire men who built empires, but you're not building anything, Mark. You're a demolition crew of one, and you're taking a wrecking ball to your own life. The conflict was escalating because he was refusing to surrender the lie. He was clinging to the identity of the savvy investor who just had a run of bad luck. To admit he was a gambling addict was to admit he was out of control, that he was weak, that the secret Mark wasn't a powerful titan but a desperate man feeding coins into a machine. That truth was too devastating for him to face. So I had to bring the devastation to him. I had to show him the rubble he was standing in. Let's talk about the National Educators Conference in Atlantic City 3 months ago, I said. Sarah's head snapped up. She looked at me, then at Mark. I could see the confusion and dawning dread in her eyes. Mark's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his cheek started to twitch. What about it? It was a good conference. I learned a lot about new teaching technologies. That's what you told Sarah. I confirmed. You told her the school district paid for it. You were gone for 3 days, a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That's right, he said, a little too quickly. That's interesting, I said, picking up a file from the table beside me. Because we spoke to your school district. They have no record of sending you to any conference. In fact, they have you down for 3 personal days that weekend. And the National Educators Conference wasn't even held in Atlantic City this year. It was in San Diego. Silence. It was a profound, crushing silence. I let it hang in the air for a moment. Mark didn't move. He just stared at me. He was a trapped animal, and he knew it. But I do have a record of where you were, Mark. I continued opening the file. I have ATM withdrawal receipts from your hidden credit card, the one Sarah found the statements for. Here's one from the Borgata Casino floor. Thursday at 11 p.m. for $500. Here's another at 1:30 a.m. for $500. And another at 4 a.m. In fact, I have receipts here for over $7,000 in cash withdrawals from casino ATMs over a 48-hour period. You weren't in a conference room, Mark. You were on a marathon. You were chasing losses, weren't you? You didn't sleep for 2 days, did you? I looked at Sarah. The tears were streaming down her face now, silent and steady. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a whole fabricated reality. She had pictured him in a hotel ballroom, taking notes, networking with other teachers. The lie was so specific, so detailed, so utterly and completely false. It was a level of betrayal she hadn't even allowed herself to imagine. And Mark, the fortress, was gone. All I saw now was the hollowed out man inside. The mask had shattered, and there was nothing left but the stark, ugly truth of his addiction. That's the moment of confrontation. It's not about yelling or pointing fingers. It's about holding up a mirror that has no distortion, no flattering angles. It's about showing a person the unvarnished, brutal reality of their choices, stripped of all the stories they tell themselves. Mark was looking at that reflection for the first time, and it was horrifying to him. The man he thought he was the smart, strategic risk taker had vanished. In his place was a common liar, a man who stole from his own family to feed a machine designed to beat him. He didn't speak. He just slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. It was a posture of complete and utter defeat. All the energy he had used to maintain the lie, to build the walls, to fight back, it was all gone. And in that vacuum of denial, something else had a chance to rush in. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was remorse. Maybe, for the first time, it was the crushing weight of the consequences. I turned my attention to Sarah. She was rocking back and forth slightly, a self-soothing motion. Sarah, I said gently, what are you feeling right now? She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Her voice was barely a whisper. Stupid. I feel so stupid. How could I not have known? How could I believe him? Listen to me, I said, making sure she was looking right at me. This is not about you being stupid. This is about him being a masterful liar. An addiction will make a person brilliant in all the wrong ways. It will make them a world-class actor, a brilliant strategist of deceit. You didn't fail to see the signs. He worked tirelessly to make sure the signs were invisible. You were married to a man who was leading a double life. You were only seeing one of them. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you a victim of a profound betrayal. I needed her to hear that, because in these moments, the collateral damage is immense. The addict's shame can be contagious. The betrayed spouse starts to question their own judgment, their own sanity. They start to take on the blame. He had already tried to shift the blame to her earlier, and I was not going to let that seed take root. Her only fault was loving and trusting the man she married. I looked back at Mark. He was still sitting with his head in his hands. Mark, I said, my voice firm again. Look at me. He slowly lifted his head. The defiance was gone. The calculation was gone. All I saw was a broken man. The fantasy is over, I told him. The Gilded Age is closed. The empire has crumbled. This is what's left. A mountain of debt, a wife whose heart you have shattered, and 2 kids at home who are going to feel the shockwaves of this for years. This is your ground zero, and you have a choice to make right here, right now. You can sit here in the rubble and feel sorry for yourself, or you can pick up the very first brick and start to rebuild. But you need to understand something. You can't rebuild with the same blueprint. The old foundation is toxic. It's gone. He finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how. I don't know how to stop. And that was it. That was the breakthrough. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. It was something far more important, an admission of powerlessness. All this time, he'd been operating under the delusion that he was in control, that he had a system, that he was just one big win away from making it all right. But to say I don't know how to stop is to finally admit that the addiction is driving the car and he's just a passenger. For an addict, that is the most terrifying and the most liberating sentence they can ever utter. It's the end of the lie and the first shaky step toward a different kind of truth. You're right, you don't know how, I said, because if you did, you would have done it already. You can't think your way out of a problem you behaved your way into. You need help, real help, not just promising Sarah you'll stop, not just deleting the apps off your phone. You need intensive, inpatient treatment. You need to be in a place where you are stripped of your secrets, where the only option is radical honesty, first with yourself and then with others. I laid it out for him. We had a facility on standby, one that specializes in gambling addiction and co-occurring disorders, because this is rarely just about gambling. It's about the underlying issues, the feelings of inadequacy, the need for escape, the inability to cope with the pressures of his own life. It was a 90-day program. No phone, no internet, no access to the outside world that wasn't therapeutic. Just him and his demons and a team of professionals to help him fight them. This isn't a negotiation, Mark, I said. This is a lifeline. Sarah brought you here hoping to find the man she married. I'm telling you, that man is buried alive under this addiction. This is your chance to dig him out. If you walk out of here today and try to do this on your own, you will fail. And the next time this blows up, and it will blow up, she may not be here to make the call. The stakes could not be higher. This is for your life. He looked over at Sarah. He really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years, without a screen of deception between them. He saw the pain, the exhaustion, the flicker of hope she was trying so hard to keep alive. And in that moment, he had to decide which was more important, the secret self who got a thrill from the spin of a wheel, or the real self who had a chance, a slim one, to be a husband and a father again. His shoulders sagged, and he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of surrender. And for an addict, surrender is where victory begins. That nod wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of the beginning. The outcome of a situation like this is never a neat little bow tied on top of the box. Recovery isn't a destination, it's a journey, and Mark had just agreed to take the first step onto a very long, very difficult road. He left the studio and went directly to the treatment facility we had arranged. He didn't go home. He didn't get to pack a bag. That's crucial. You have to strike while the window of clarity is open. Give an addict an hour, and they can build a whole new fortress of denial. For the next 90 days, Sarah's life was a different kind of difficult. She had to navigate the wreckage. She had to deal with the debt collectors, which was a full-time job in itself. The total was staggering, far more than she had imagined. We're talking 6 figures spread across secret credit cards and personal loans. She had to sit her children down, a 12-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, and try to explain in age-appropriate terms that their father was sick and had gone away to get better. How do you explain an illness that's built on lies? How do you protect your children's image of their father while also acknowledging the reality of the harm he caused? There are no easy answers to that. She had to face the judgment and the questions from family and friends who had only ever seen the perfect family on the outside. We provided her with a therapist and a financial advisor. The therapy was for her. She had her own healing to do. Trust doesn't just reappear. It has to be rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick, and she had to decide if she was even willing to be the contractor for that job. The financial advisor was to help her triage the financial disaster. It meant downsizing their home. It meant selling the minivan. It meant a radical, painful restructuring of the life they had built. These are the tangible consequences. It's not just an emotional wound. It's a practical one that affects every single day. During his time in treatment, Mark was forced to confront the man in the mirror he had avoided for so long. Through intensive individual and group therapy, he started to deconstruct the why. Why? The need for the secret life. It went back, as it so often does, to his own upbringing. His father had been a quiet, emotionally distant man who had worked a factory job for 40 years. He was a good provider, but he never took risk, never showed passion, never seemed truly alive. Mark had sworn he would never be like that. He wanted to be bigger, more dynamic, but in his attempt to escape his father's shadow, he had fallen into a different kind of trap. His father had been passively absent. Mark had become actively deceptive. He had to write a letter to Sarah as part of his therapy. Not an excuse letter, but a letter of full disclosure and accountability. He had to list every lie, every secret, every dollar. It was a brutal, humbling process. He also had to write a letter to his children, one he wouldn't send for a long time, explaining his disease. This is the work of recovery. It's not just about stopping a behavior. It's about excavating the source of it and then taking radical responsibility for the damage it caused. When he finally came home after 90 days, he was a different man. He was thinner, quieter. The practiced calm had been replaced by a quiet humility. The arrogance was gone. He looked raw, vulnerable, and, for the first time since I'd met him, truly present. But coming home wasn't a victory parade. It was the start of the next phase. He had to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings every single day. He had to surrender his finances completely to Sarah. He no longer had a credit card or an ATM card. She gave him a small cash allowance each week, like a child. For a man whose secret identity was built on being a powerful high roller, this was a profound ego blow, but it was necessary. It was about creating guardrails, structures of accountability to protect him from himself. The first few months were incredibly tense. Sarah watched his every move. If he was on his phone for too long, her anxiety would spike. If he was 5 minutes late coming home from work, her mind would race. He knew this. He had to live with the ghost of his past, with the fact that he had single-handedly destroyed the trust in his own home. He had to earn it back, not with grand gestures, but with the boring consistency of honest, everyday actions. Making coffee in the morning, helping the kids with their homework, being where he said he would be when he said he would be there. It's a slow, unglamorous process. Did they make it? I followed up with them a year later. They were still together. They were living in a smaller apartment. Mark was still teaching, but he was also sponsoring 2 other men in his GA program. He told me that the urge to gamble hadn't vanished entirely. He described it as a low-grade hum in the back of his mind, one that got louder when he was stressed or tired. But now, instead of hiding it, he talked about it. He told Sarah when he was having a hard day, he called his sponsor. He went to an extra meeting. He had replaced the secret with a strategy. Sarah told me that she still had bad days. Days where the anger and the sense of betrayal would wash over her. But she had also learned to see his addiction as a disease, not a moral failing. She hadn't forgiven him, not completely, but she was in the process of it. She was choosing to love the man who was fighting to be present over the ghost who had haunted her house for years. Their story isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't have a Hollywood ending where everything is perfect. The outcome is messy and it's real. They are a family permanently scarred by the choices he made. The debt will follow them for a decade. The memory of the betrayal will always be a part of their history, but they are also a family that is actively choosing to heal. Mark's secret life nearly cost him everything, but the destruction it caused also created an opportunity. It forced him to tear down a false identity and start the hard work of building a real one, an authentic one, based not on the thrill of a secret win, but on the quiet integrity of showing up day after day and just telling the truth. And in the end, that's a gamble that's actually worth taking. When I hung up the phone with Mark and Sarah a year later, I sat with their story for a while. You know, people see the confrontation on the stage, they see the tears and the breakthrough, and they think that's the victory. It's not. That's just the opening bell of a 15-round fight. The real victory is a quiet Tuesday night, a year later, when the urge hits and you make a phone call instead of a bet. It's looking at your wife across the dinner table and not having a single secret hiding behind your eyes. That's the work. That's the win. What struck me most about Mark's case was how perfectly it illustrated the insidious nature of a process addiction like gambling. It's not like alcohol, where you can smell it on someone's breath. It's not like drugs, where you might see the physical toll. Gambling is a ghost. It lives in the digital world, in the quiet glow of a phone screen in a dark room. It allows for the construction of a double life that is nearly perfect in its execution because it leaves so few physical traces. The only evidence is the devastation it leaves in its wake, the empty bank accounts, the shattered trust. Mark was able to function as a teacher, a husband, and a father for years, all while his secret self was pulling levers and placing bets, bankrupting their future. And at its core, this was never about the money. If it were about money, he would have stopped when he started losing. The money is just the currency of the addiction. It's the tool. The addiction itself was to the identity. In his real life, he felt average, constrained, predictable. He was Mr. Thompson, the history teacher. But in his secret life, He was a player. He was a strategist. He was someone who understood odds and systems, who could feel the thrill of a big risk. He was a man who felt powerful. The tragedy, of course, is that it was a counterfeit power. The entire time he thought he was the master of this secret world, he was its slave. The house always wins, and that's not just true in a casino. It's true in the casino of the mind. The addiction is the house, and it will eventually take everything you have. The confrontation on stage was a necessary demolition. We had to bring his rock bottom to him. Some people have to lose their house, their family, and their freedom before they are willing to change. My philosophy has always been, why wait for that? Let's raise the bottom. Let's create a moment of consequence so profound, so undeniable that it forces a moment of clarity. For Mark, that moment was seeing the irrefutable evidence of his lies laid out in a file, and more importantly, seeing the look on his wife's face as she realized the man she trusted had been living a lie. That was his bottom. The public exposure was secondary to the personal implosion of his carefully crafted reality. And you can't talk about this outcome without honoring the strength of Sarah. It's easy to say, well, I would have left him, and nobody could have blamed her if she had. The level of betrayal was catastrophic. But her choice to stay, to do the work with him, was not a sign of weakness. It was a testament to a different kind of strength. It's the strength to hold someone accountable while also holding space for their recovery. It's the strength to live in the wreckage and see the potential for a new foundation. It requires a level of grace and grit that is truly rare. She had to grieve the man she thought she married and the life she thought she had, all while learning to build a new life with a man who was fighting to become whole. That's a hero's journey in its own right. Ultimately, the title of that episode, The Reason They Came to Me, was about a secret he never planned to say out loud. And that's the paradox of all secrets like this. They feel like they protect you. They feel like a shield, preserving the image you present to the world, but they don't. A secret like Mark's is not a shield, it's a cage. It isolates you. It disconnects you from everyone you love. It forces you to live in your head, constantly managing the lie, patching the cracks. The thing he feared most was the truth coming out. But the truth coming out was the only thing that could save him. The moment he surrendered, the moment he admitted he was powerless and that the secret was too big, the cage door swung open. The path out was terrifying and it was painful, but it was a path back to the real world, back to his life. He had to learn to find his worth, not in the fantasy of a big win, but in the simple, profound truth of being a good man. And that's a lesson no one can teach you in a history book.